Good morning. We're glad you have chosen to join us on this stormy Sunday. I'm the Reverend Tony Lorenzen, the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Meriden and the Mattatuck Unitarian Universalist Society. We are not holding in-person services this morning because of the storm, so we invite you all to enter into the service here online with us once again. This morning we'll be taking a look at the idea of growing where you're planted. As we begin, we light the symbol of our faith, the flaming chalice. May this flame provide the light and warmth we need to grow where we are planted. Please join us in the Mattatuck Unitarian Universalist Society Covenant. Love is the spirit of this society, dwelling together in peace, seeking truth, helping one another, serving human needs, honoring the earth and all that is. This is our covenant.
Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound.
The Stonecutter, a traditional Japanese folk tale. Long ago in Japan, there lived a stonemason, a man who cut stones from the mountain and the earth and chiseled and shaped them into things and made things with concrete and cement. He was good at his job and always had enough work to earn enough for his family's necessities. They lived in a small house. They had enough to eat. But they certainly were not rich, and there were no luxuries. They wore plain clothes and ate simple meals. The stonecutter dreamed always as he worked of having just a little bit more in life, of not always being covered in stone dust, not constantly having nicks and cuts on his hands and arms, and of his wife and daughter having just one nice fancy set of clothes. Their small, simple house was at the foot of a mountain on the outskirts of the village. Legend spoke of a windy spirit of the mountain that granted wishes to the just and the needy. But the stonecutter didn't believe it, as the mountain spirit had never once answered his prayer for a breeze on a hot day. One day, he was contacted by a wealthy merchant who wanted stone tiles for courtyard and baths. When the stonecutter delivered the tiles he'd made, he saw the luxury in which the merchant lived. He smelled the abundant food in the kitchens and saw important people coming and going to meet with the merchant. He saw the merchant's family dressed in finery. This merchant is wealthy and powerful, thought the stonecutter. His life is luxurious and easy. He looked at his dust-covered hands, pushing a rickety wagon filled with stone tiles. He was jealous of the merchant's wealth and life. His mind spun with the jealousy and envy all the way home. As he pushed his empty wagon into the rickety shed, he said, "I wish I could be a wealthy merchant." To his great surprise, he suddenly became the merchant. He looked up, and his house was a huge and clean mansion. His wife walked out the door suddenly dressed in finery. He looked at his hands and saw they were clean, with a ring of precious stone on each finger. His wagon was a beautiful handcart, and servants now unloaded fresh food from the market from it, ducks and shrimp and vegetables and herbs of all kinds. He hired others to cut the stone and do the work. He stopped going to the village to have tea with his friends, and before long he went from being the simple stonecutter everyone loved and admired to an out-of-touch rich man even his servants and family came to dislike. One day the stonecutter looked out his window and saw a magistrate being carried in a sedan chair through the streets, accompanied by guards and servants, and everyone, the rich and the poor, had to bow as the magistrate passed. "That's what I need to become now," he thought. "A magistrate, so even people who don't like me must respect me and bow when I pass by." A wind blew in the window from the mountain, and suddenly his wealthy home was an official's palace. He was a magistrate, whose servants carried everywhere in a chair coated with gems. They bowed and respected him, but people also feared and hated him. He was more disliked now than when he was a rich merchant. One summer day, while being carried through town in his fancy sedan chair, he wiped the sweat off his brow as the sun was relentless and everyone was moving slowly and seeking the shadows. "That's what's mightier than a magistrate even," he thought. "The sun, it shines on the poor and the powerful. No one escapes its light and its heat." When he got home, he stood at the base of the mountain in his magistrate's garden and said, "Make me the sun." And suddenly he was the sun. He saw the world from the heavens. He shone on the rich and the poor and the weak and the powerful. He was cursed by them all as he made work and travel difficult and burned crops in the fields. He thought he might be the sun for eternity when one day a huge cloud black as the unbroken night passed between him and the earth below. It rained and brought relief to the problems caused by the overbearing sun. And when the cloud finally passed and dissipated, he shone brightly down on the mountain's peak and demanded, "You shall now make me a storm front and powerful cloud." And so it was, and he blocked out the sun and caused floods. And very soon he felt an irresistible pushing at his back, and noticed trees being uprooted and hurtling by him, and realized the force pushing at him was the wind. And so, as he sent a deluge down the mountainside, he ordered the mountain spirit to make him the wind, and instantly it was so. He blew through the rain and clouds, he blew roofs off houses and lifted up trees, he spun around in gales and tornadoes, and nothing could stop him, it seemed. Until he eventually came to a mountain range, and the mountains were not bothered by his blowing. He blew an outraged roar to the heavens. I must be now a mountain of stone. And just like that, as had been happening for so long, he instantly became a mountain of stone. The sun couldn't burn him. The storms and rain and wind raged against him but did no damage. He stood powerful and strong. Then one day, faintly on the wind, he heard a sound and listened closely. It grew stronger. He felt a sharp pain. What could possibly be harming me, he thought, a great mountain of stone? And the sound became more distinct, and another beam of pain rifled through him. And looking down, far below at his stony roots and foothills, he saw the figure of a simple stone cutter. I did not feel like planting a garden this past spring, which is unusual for me. And truth be told, by the start of summer, I was running on empty. It felt like too much work, overwhelming, too heavy. And combined with the fact that due to the chance placement of trees and buildings on and around our property, there's no real open space that gets a real good strong dose of sunlight for the majority of the day. Things that need partial shade grow well, but things that need lots of sun, not so much. So, being as the garden was a little on the weaker side last year, that was the icing on the cake for me. We did not have ideal conditions for a garden, but if we wanted to grow anything at home, we had no choice but to plant where we were. For we were planted on that lot, and that's where we'll be as long as we're in Woodbury. So my wife Tuesday and I have a friend, and that friend helped us with the garden. I'm helping Tuesday a bit with it now, but I kind of left it be till the start of August. And our friend who helped us get started this year works in international development in the area of nutrition, farming, and crop development in Nepal. So he did some soil rehabilitation work and some of the things he does to get the farmers going who he works with. He worked on one of our sunny herb patches, turning up the earth, dealing with the thick underground roots that were there. And he planted some of the seeds he uses with the farmers in Nepal, a special type of hard corn, another long-growing flat green bean, another was, the third sister, a type of squash. The corn looks especially good for long roots and breaking up the soil, and maybe next year the soil will be even better. But even this year, even now, the tomatoes are doing well, and we've been eating the green beans for a week. I'd rather have had a yard with a lot of open space and huge amounts of direct sunlight all day long. And I'd rather have had the inspiration to garden like a boss on the land I did have, but I didn't this year. So what we did is we grew the garden as best we could, as we could plant it, with the help we could get, and it will be good enough. I wish I could feel like this all the time, that it will all be good enough, but sometimes I'm grumpy and I grumble and I want things to be different, better. A lot of that going around lately. We are all the stonecutter. Being human means tending to give in to the feeling that your life was once better than it is now, or will be better than it is now. No matter what he becomes, the stonecutter was always seeing something better that he wanted to be, until he ends up right back where he all started from. Now, this is not about the grass always being greener on the other side of the fence. We all tend to compare our insides with other people's outsides, as it's said. So we have the illusion of grasses being greener, even when the grass isn't. Although the grass always being greener somewhere else is a lie, so true is the proposition that the grass is never greener somewhere else. Sometimes it is. But the stonecutter story is not a parable about the grass always being greener on the other side of the fence. The stonecutter story is about realizing that everyone and everywhere has disadvantages and advantages. Sometimes these are greater and lesser. But there is no station in life, no place in life, or location in life that's perfect. Better, obviously. Worse, obviously. But perfect? No, hardly. Even things that seem perfect in the life of others only seem that way because we only see it on the outside. We see the clothing, the costume, the mask, and it can be, and usually is, a different story when we see behind the curtain, when we see the face, when we see the naked soul, let's say, of others. Their heart laid open. When we do, what looked like a better life may indeed be full of pain, hurt, misery, loss, trauma that we can't and don't know anything about. None of us can magically change our circumstances, for better or worse, triumph or tragedy, in any given singular moment or day. We are where we are. This week in the Atlantic magazine, Scott Barry Kaufman has an essay called The Opposite of Toxic Positivity, in which he makes a case for toxic optimism. He discusses not only the inappropriate but inaccurate advice to always look on the bright side. Tragic optimism is the search for meaning during the inevitable tragedies of human existence, and is better for us than avoiding darkness and trying to just stay positive. Tragic optimism is a term developed by Viktor Frankl. It's his term for the search for meaning in light of trauma and devastation and irrationality and the cruelty of humans to another. He came up with this in the wake of the Holocaust. This is, in a sense, the Unitarian Universalist way, tragic optimism. As James Luther Adams taught us, we trust that we have enough human and divine resources to justify hope, ultimate, if not immediate, optimism. Unitarian Universalism does not allow us to fall into uncritical positivity. Neither are we encouraged to give in to negativism, or worse yet, nihilism. Tragic optimism fits our condition and our tradition. We do not dismiss reality even when reality is difficult. Life can be full of suffering, and it can also be full of love. Therefore, we don't deal in empty platitudes, such as telling a person who's lost a loved one that it was God's will, or that the person's in a better place. We don't tell someone who gets fired from a job or who goes through divorce or gets cancer or gets COVID that everything happens for a reason. We do not believe in redemptive suffering. Suffering is suffering. Suffering hurts. even though we don't justify trauma by saying the horrible thing was part of a bigger plan, or what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, we do admit, and we do understand, that surviving in itself makes us survivors. And suffering through things and surviving sometimes does lead to some types of personal improvement or benefit in some way. But it is not salvific. And hard lessons are hard lessons learned. And people who have to learn hard lessons or learn something through things they had to suffer through, well, I bet most of the time tell you they wish they could have not learned it or gone without. We do not believe in redemptive suffering. We do believe, though, it's possible to learn and improve even from very difficult circumstances that we survive. Psychology calls this post-traumatic growth. Kaufman writes, researchers who study post-traumatic growth have found that people can grow in many ways from difficult times, including having a greater appreciation of one's life and relationships, as well as increased compassion, altruism, purpose, utilization of personal strengths, spiritual development, and creativity. Importantly, it's not the traumatic event itself that leads to growth, for no one is thankful, he points out, for COVID, but rather how the event is processed in its wake. The changes in worldview that result from the event and the active search for meaning we undertake during and after the event. Our congregation has grown during the pandemic. We've grown organizationally, incarnationally, numerically in the Mattituck UU Society. We've grown in our use of technology, and we feel a bit more at ease with new ways of doing things. We were forced to deal with the new reality, and we did, and we have been. We've grown right where we are planted. And each day for us as individuals and as a congregation has been a one-day-at-a-time journey through this. We've dealt with things as we've had to. We didn't choose what happened to us, but, as always, we can choose, and we have chosen how to react. We've chosen to learn new things. We've chosen to learn technology that allows us to function when we can't meet in person due to COVID or hurricanes. Even as we are surviving, we are getting ready for future growth. And for that we are grateful, and it strengthens us in our gratefulness. In his essay, Kaufman explains that gratefulness is more powerful than gratitude. He writes, Christy Nelson, the executive director of a network for grateful living, says gratitude is a momentary emotion, but gratefulness is an overall orientation that is not contingent on something happening to us, but rather on the way we arrive to life. Gratitude is good. Gratefulness is even better. Research supports claim that a daily gratitude practice is indeed valuable, but I think the act of stopping and recognizing things for which we're grateful, done with regularity over time, becomes a way of being, a developed and practiced virtue, a habit, a part of our character. Gratefulness, then, I would say, is essential if we are to grow where we are planted. Growing where planted is non-negotiable for some people, such as those fleeing the Taliban in Afghanistan, or Haitians living in the wake of an earthquake, or those displaced by wildfires on our west coast or floods on our east coast. Those in traumatic situations have no choice if they are to survive. They must find a way to make the best of the moment where and when they are. Similarly, all of us dealing with COVID, and it's been traumatic for all of us. For those who have died and lost loved ones, who care for the sick and dying, for those who are sick or have been sick, it has been worse. But the pandemic has upended the life of anyone paying attention to medical science and living in our society. We have no choice but to find ways to survive and grow where and when we are. I've said this since the very beginning of pandemic, that the only way we get out of this is to get through it. And the only way to get through it is to go through it together. Let us acknowledge that we will not, each of us, be at our best in any given moment of any given day. And our best will change moment to moment, day by day. But we are all asked to do our best in each and every moment. Let us be forgiving of each other. Surviving pandemic takes a toll on each of us, and in ways we ourselves might not even be aware. For some of us, due to health conditions or individual emotional makeup, the practice of suggested guidelines on the best public health recommendations may not even be enough to let us feel comfortable in crowds or indoors, especially with the recommendations getting more strict, to be more conservative. So let us all be quick to apologize and quick to offer forgiveness. None of us want to live through a pandemic or a hurricane. Most of us are furious at, or worse, at those who are ignorantly and stubbornly insisting on not masking up and not getting vaccinated. But humanity has survived pandemics before. The grass is either greener or grosser, I guess, in a pandemic that you live through as opposed to the pandemic they lived through. People living through pandemics before us did not have a constant 24/7, 365 news cycle that spread not only bad news but propaganda and conspiracy theories, and added literally a world of other stress to that, fighting the pandemic physically and emotionally. It's a pile. People who fought pandemics before us also didn't have vaccines and hand sanitizer or mass-produced high-quality face masks. Until recently, people battling pandemics didn't even know what they were battling. They attributed disease to the gods being displeased, or magic, or the evil eye, or even bad smells, the humors. That's why we have the medieval paintings of plague times with people wearing those face masks with those long nose, because they thought that the disease lived in the bad smell of the waste and the spoiling food and body odor and everything else. No one, past or present, ever chooses or wishes or deserves to live through such a time as pandemic or natural disaster or a political nation-failing crisis or fires that destroy everything in its path. What we do get to choose, however, is how we respond. John Kabat-Zinn says you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And so we surf, we swim. If we need to, we tread water. If we need to, we just lay on the water and float. We do our best. In the first book of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Frodo and Gandalf lament the hand they've been dealt, having to deal with this ring in the Dark Lord. And this is how it goes in the scene. "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf. "And so do all who live to see such times. But that's not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time given us. All that's left to us is to grow where we're planted. If we need fertilizer, we feed the crops. If we need water, we gather it from the river or the rain. If we don't have the energy, if growing is too much right now because we're overwhelmed or too angry, then we ask for help. And we live the best life we can today, here in the when and where we have been planted."
There's a love holding me. There is a love holding all that I love. There is a love holding all our rest.
Spirit of life, we come together once more imperfectly through the wonder of technology. We're grieving, we're angry, we're frustrated that weather and pandemic keep us apart yet again. Our spirits ache with the pain of those in Afghanistan and in Haiti, and those battling fires on our west coast and floods on our east coast. Our meager efforts, our meager selves seem overshadowed and overwhelmed by the continuing struggle against white supremacy, the continuing struggle to make it through our days in worsening public health circumstances. We offer these words adapted by a prayer from Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador, who gave his life struggling with the poor and oppressed of his land. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that the beloved community always lies ahead of us. No words say all that can be said. No prayer fully expresses our particular take on things. No pastoral visit brings complete healing and wholeness. No program accomplishes the congregation's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water the seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that, for this enables us to do something and do it well. It may be incomplete, but it's always a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for love to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end result, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders. We are ministers to one another, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own. Today our hearts are with Denise Pedane and all who are ill, especially everyone affected by COVID and all the people who care for the sick and the dying. May all those who refuse to wear masks and refuse to be vaccinated have a change of heart, so that they may be on our side as we side with love against ignorance, hate, and violence. In the name of all things healthy and whole, we lift up these words of aspiration.
Spirit of life, come to sing in my heart, all stirrings of compassion, blow with the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
The tropical storm may have driven us inside, but there's still coffee. Please join us, won't you? go.uucentralct.org/coffee. That's go.uucentralct.org/coffee. See you there in a few minutes.
We've come to the end of our service this morning. Once again, we're glad to have had you with us. As we extinguish the chalice, I invite you to join in the words that the Mattituck UU Society says together as they end service each Sunday. Go in peace.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Amen.